think we go into every album feeling a bit nervous, actually. I always do, because you never presume it's going to work. That's the way we work in the studio. We arrive and with no bits and sort of turn on the gear the first day and play. There's always a little edge there, I think, a bit like, what if we sort of, nothing comes out?
I think we felt with Abacab, we sort of like, in many ways, you cleared out all the furniture, And so with Genesis, it was a kind of a question of redecorating a little bit. And I think, we had some areas we hadn't been in before. We had our own studio at this point in time, which obviously we had for Abacab, but it was the first time we were able to actually record in the studio.
That album was the first time we actually did write and record and mix in that environment. The Abacab prior to that was written in the house while the barn was being, or the cowshed was being transformed into the studio. So we actually did finish the album, Abacab, in the studio, but Mama was the real first time we'd done what we set out to do, which was write, record and mix in our own place. So it was quite exciting.
It's always referred to now as the Mama album, at least we always referred to it as the Mama album, so perhaps we should have just called it that. But at the time it didn't seem that obvious, and we thought, well, we'd never called an album Genesis, let's just call this one that.
The thought of drawing too much attention to just one particular song was maybe one of the reasons why we decided not to call it Mama, but it seems very unlike us now. I can't imagine us calling anything Genesis now.
Mama's a great example of this album. That sums up how the album worked. The version you probably heard of Mama that's there was recorded very early on. It was a slightly longer section, if I remember rightly. And so you captured spontaneity for the first time. Actually, you captured us kind of writing things and playing them very early on, and recording them rather than finishing the song and going into record, somewhere else later.
We had various versions of it. We had the drum machine part, and then I sort of bass pedal and put on these sounds on top of it, and we had a sort of atmosphere going which we knew was going to be strong. We didn't know quite what the top line was going to be. It could have been a lot of things and still been good. So we sort of got a basis down very early and worked on it like that.
I suppose Mama was a song that most people, because it's drum machine based, everybody thinks it's my thing, but actually Mike was the one that came up with that early Linn drum machine sound with the going through the gated reverb.
Put it into a boogie amplifier and turned it up incredibly loud, so it's distorted, and got this great sound,
This portable amplifier was just jumping over the ground like this, but it produced this fantastic sound. It made the drum machine sound really, really good. And almost just from hearing that thing doing that, we felt we got a song.
And it was the early days of taking a MIDI cable out of the back of the drum machine, plugging it into a keyboard. So if you had a cowbell going da 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 da, and Tony put his hand on the keyboard, it would just play the rhythm, but it would play the notes, so dun 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 dun. And I was into sort of this sort of John Lennon Bebopalula Echo thing. I can't see. And Hugh Padgham had brought in this record that had just come out by Grandmaster Flash, which was The Message, which he put on. And this is kind of really, it's hard to believe now, but it's really early days of rap, so no one had really heard this stuff. And he put this like, it's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. And we all thought that was great, let's laugh at such character. It's great, so we kept playing it. And we just happened to be going back into the studio after having listened to it to do Mama. And so we were just sort of improvising our way around it, and every now and again I go, the guys would laugh. And anyway, it became a thing. It became kind of the hook of the song. And it's all because of Grandmaster Flash. And you ask most Genesis fans that, and that would be a million miles away. But that's how it happened.
With the lyrics on songs, you're always looking for something. I think Phil himself had got quite into the stage of where it was more important how the lyrics sounded almost than what it meant in some cases. And I think Mama's an example of that, really. It's sort of loosely probably about sort of a sort of prostitute or something, really, but you don't quite know what she is, but you've got this sort of feel about it.
Mama is this elderly, voluptuous hooker that this kid's got this, this teenager has got this thing about. And he just dreams about her, and she just kind of takes him under her wing, but nothing sexual there. But of course, he just gets turned on because she's, sexy woman.
I think the lyrics of Mama actually is an area where Phil, maybe, I tend to think maybe more in Genesis because of the nature of the chord Tony plays, it's easy for Phil to write a little darker lyrically.
It was meant to sound very steamy and sweaty and kind of a bit like Charles Lawton, you know, in a white suit, kind of constantly wiping the back of his neck. Kind of feel sweat and steam and zzz. It's one of those songs, I think, that actually still sounds good today. If you hear it on the radio, there are some songs that date, you know, and some songs they sort of still sound pretty good. And Mama certainly has captured an atmosphere, and I think that's kind of a great example of what we always wanted to do: record these things at the right time before you'd worn them out.
Mama's my favourite track, without doubt. I think Mama is probably one of our best moments in terms of recording. I think it's got all the elements that we try and do well, vocally, lyrically, chordally, and Genesis has this ability to create this dark atmosphere. I think Mama's a great example of that. That's always what I always call one of our little sort of beatly chug songs, you know, like sort of that Beatles sound they have. A little sort of sweet little song, really.
Like Rocky Raccoon, I always think of it, you know, which was always a song I liked a lot by the Beatles, and great feel, really. I mean, I started playing that piano riff, and then Phil started doing this riff, and we knew we had a feel, you know, quite know where it was going, and I just kept all the chords very simple, and just sort of had you didn't want to kind of go miles in any direction. I wanted to kind of stay where it was because it felt really good.
But why does it always seem to be looking at you looking at me? It's always the same, it's just a shame, that's all.
At the time, anyway, it was much more obviously radio friendly than Mama, which was a little bit of a dark horse for you know, AM radio in America. I think at that point it was still AM FM, you know.
I was kind of surprised it turned out to be a big hit in America. I suppose quite a sort of catchy little phrase Phil had on the word "that's all," but I think it was just our time was right in America. I think around about that album where things just started working on the radio. You know, we've been playing the States for years and years, and suddenly we got better at writing shorter songs.
You looking at me, it's always the same, it's just a shame, that's all.
Home by the Sea, where we were able to improvise. Phil had the riff, the dun chicka jung jung, that, which was the second part, and Mike and I just improvised on top of it, and we made up a couple of 30-minute tapes of us just improvising on top of it, and then went through it and just found the good bits and stuck them all together, and that's exactly what you've got on the piece, and I think it's one of my favourite of our instrumental pieces of all.
That album also was the beginning, the first time we used like electronic drums, you know, and Simmons was a new drum system that had come out, and it was like playing on Formica tops, you know, little octagonal Formica tops. They eventually started to make them feel a bit more like drum skins, you know, real drums, but it never really worked. But I actually didn't mind playing on the Formica tops. You know, everyone used to have wrist problems, and I quite liked it. But Home by the Sea and That's All and Silver Rainbow were all spaced on this sound, this instrument. And Home by the Sea, that was all, you know, that I sat down and played that pattern on that sound with those presets, and you know, it had such a lot of atmosphere, and everyone started playing along. It was a bit like kind of comparable to Intruder with Peter's thing, where you just sort of get a sound and you play with it, and suddenly that's a musical part, you know, and everybody jams along with it. So it became very, very important, and Tony wrote the lyrics to Home by the Sea as kind of a ghost story. But even that, you know, this is kind of the interesting way Genesis used to work, and you know, could, if we ever do something again, could work the same way. We'd be playing, and because we were kind of writing with a drum machine at the time, you know, ding, 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 and I started singing Home by the Sea, But I don't know why I started singing it, but I just started singing those lyrics with that melody.
By the sea, creeping up the blind side, shining up the wall, stealing through the dark of night.
When we were writing the song, Phil had this one phrase he kept singing, "Home by the sea, home by the sea," and I thought, well, I know I was writing the lyrics to this thing. I thought, well, home by the sea, what does that conjure up? I thought, well, let's have a spooky home by the sea, you know, and the idea of a guy, of a burglar going in there and actually getting enveloped and suddenly being all these ghosts surrounding him, everything just quite appealed to me. And also some of the melodic, some of the little keyboard things that were happening sort of felt a bit ghosty. And I thought that was quite a nice thing to do. And then the idea really, which the song is of the idea that we're telling our life story through our songs, which is sort of represented by the third verse of the song, as we relive our lives in what we tell you, which I think is quite a sort of strong thing. And it's sort of what you do in a group, I think.
As we relive our lives in what we tell you.
There are certain big songs that fall into categories. I think Home by the Sea is what I call, and Domino, for example, are standalone songs. There are no other songs quite like it before and after, I think, which is why they're still played on stage.
Instrumental music is a very important ingredient in Genesis music. I think it's something that makes us distinctive, you know. It's for those that know our records well, it's always a lot of standout moments that have been that way. I think, you know, you go back to the days of Cinema Show or Firth the Fifth. They're sort of probably on that particular album set in England, those are probably almost the most memorable pieces of music, you know. And I think on this, you know, Home by the Sea, that second Home by the Sea thing is a very strong melodic piece, and it works very well instrumentally. It's very exciting, so yes, they are important.
Beyond the silver rainbow.
Side one, as it were, the old side one, is kind of got the three best known songs on it. Mama, That's All, and Home by the Sea. And the second side is slightly more quirky songs on it. Just slightly forgotten side, I think, in many ways, of Genesis. And I think it contains a couple of, you know, of classic songs. One of them, Silver Rainbow, which I think is a real favourite of mine. You know, it was a Phil started playing this kind of sort of like Adam and the Ants kind of drum thing, you know, with the Simmons and just banging his way through it, and started playing this piano riff on top of it. And I just thought it was a really strong song, and I hoped it would go a little further than it did, actually, but it wasn't sort of recognised.
I think a song like Illegal Alien is one of our sort of humorous moments, which in the album I think balances out nicely with the longer songs, instrumental stuff. I think a bit of humour always helps. And funnily enough, I'm not a, you know, I don't go on too much about the remixes and all that stuff, you know. But actually, this is one of the songs that's really improved Mick Davis. I mean, the mix he did of this one, the new stereo mix, compared to the old one, is so much better. The Genesis cover was, I think, probably our worst cover. That was well dodgy, actually, I think, the kids' break. So I remember that one really was a moment a bit like, look, we've got the album got to come out, there's a tour coming up, here are the choices. Which one do you dislike the least? And that was it. Not a great cover.
Inspiration was very lacking, I think, on this thing. I don't know, we used the guy, Bill Smith, who'd done the previous Abacab album, which we thought was a great cover, we really liked that a lot. And this one, we were a bit stuck for ideas, and he'd got this photo, and we looked at it, we thought it was quite interesting, you know, but then we actually put it on the album, we thought, we don't think this is very good. And we almost tried to do a last-minute sort of change of the cover. But, I mean, in the end, it is just a cover, I suppose, but it's not a classic one. The idea seemed better than the result, let me put it like that.
I would put Genesis as one of my favourite albums, I think. It's a nice balance of long songs, short songs. And I think probably the most important thing about this album, actually, that's the point. I think one of the main things about this album is the first time we actually went in to record, having slightly changed our sound with Hugh Padgham. And going back and doing this remixing with Mick Davis has been doing it, you come to the Hugh Padgham albums and they sound bloody good. I mean, you know, we had real trouble trying to... Nick naturally did the surround sound mix, and then while he was there, did a new stereo mix. But we had a bit of trouble. Some of the new stereo mixes, you know, you couldn't better Hugh's work. I think he got a fantastic sound on this album, the next one.
Having done all these remixes, I've had a chance to sort of look at everything, and you come across bits and pieces that you'd sort of forgotten about a little bit, really, and songs you'd sort of, a bit secondary in your own brain. Things like "It's Going to Get Better" on the second side of this album. Again, it's another one I've sort of forgotten about a bit, but and it sounded really good. I think on this album, that's quite a good representation on this, was one thing that had occurred in sort of keyboard land between Abacab and this album was the introduction of sampling synthesizer, and a lot of some of the sounds on the album. I mean, things like the koto that's used in the middle of Mama and various other little bits and pieces. But what I used to like to do was, which obviously is done a lot nowadays, was sample like little bits of music and then see what you could do with it. And an example of that is on the introduction to "It's Going to Get Better," where I just recorded the beginning of this classical album. It just was four cello notes. And I'd originally recorded to try and get a good string sample, when I pressed it, it sounded awful. But then for some reason, I pressed 4 notes at the same time, and this incredible interweaving harmonies all of a sudden it came up. I thought, this is brilliant, fantastic. I'm doing nothing, and it's sounding wonderful. And so that sort of, made me think, and I just became quite a big feature within Genesis from then on, really, using those kind of ideas.
There's no other bands really that I've come across or heard about that do things, play, write like that. Usually in a band there's one writer or a pair of writers, or there's 2 individual writers that submit material. But this is a lot like jazz. It's a lot like sitting down in a room with 3 guys and just playing, and eventually, it starts to sound good. And that's the moment you take the picture of, so that when you go back to it, that's where you start from. That's the magic of having a chemistry of people, and that's why, I never take that kind of thing lightly. The fact is that with the 3 of us can do that, and not many people do that. And there may be bits that are slightly suspect, and there are bits that aren't as good as others, but there's some great stuff in there that came out of nowhere, and that's what's good about the band.
On this album, a lot of the stuff really just came around, our pattern was Phil would start with the drum machine, and they're always a little bit different, and we'd bang it up, and off we'd go. And trying to play some chords, I'd bash around on the guitar, and Phil would start singing. And this little loop he started with kind of set the mood for something. Had a guitar riff, I think. And off we go. And then on top of it, the other thing is the lyric it's a simple sort of pop song in many ways, but the lyrics got a nice little sort of play on words and invisible touch, I think, actually. It's quite strong, that.
And now it seems I'm falling for her. She seems to have invisible touch.
When we were playing around with it, Mike had that ding 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 ding. It reminded me of the Sheila E. thing, and so I started to sing something which I remembered as being something like this Sheila E. thing, because I liked it. A little idea that you hear and you take it and you think, I would have done this with that idea, In the lyrics, I still joke about these lyrics to my son when we talk about people that we know, either have had relationships with or, close relatives. People that they have the invisible touch that I'm not quite sure, but whatever it is they do, you can't get them out of your mind, In the live lyric of the song that I sing, though she will fuck up your life, you'll love her just the same, It's kind of one of those things, and I actually, I like that lyric, because for me it's kind of, been part of my life, I suppose. She seems to have an invisible touch. She reaches in and grabs right hold of your heart, and tears it out, but you still go back for more, that kind of thing. So I feel quite close to that song.
It certainly took us to a different kind of level, and I always thought at the time, and I remember we were doing this because we did Invisible Touch, the album came out, and it was #1 and everything, and then we came about a year later, we did the Wembley Stadium, four nights at Wembley Stadium, and the album went back up, actually at #2, I think, again, and it had been in the top 10, I think, the whole year. It was just extraordinary, really, and I did think when we did those shows at Wembley Stadium, I thought, it will never be bigger than this. This is it. We've had an album that's been #1 everywhere, and we're selling out these shows 4 times and everything. And it was a great feeling. I just thought it was, I'll enjoy it, I think, because I thought it went on last. It lasted longer than I thought it was going to, actually.
I think we probably all felt that it was a single, or the representative, the flagship of the record a bit. But it was #1 in America, the first #1 album and single in America. It was a very big record for us.
Tonight, 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 I think it is one of our sort of a prime example of that phase of writing where Phil would start with this great little sort of loop thing, on a drum machine with that echo sound on it. So when the song started, before we even played a note, myself or Tony, you've got this atmosphere, like sort of setting the stage, and then Tony plays some chords and off we go, I think. And that's a very strong song, I think. And I think Tonight, Tonight actually also is very unique. Nothing else we've done quite like it. There are certain songs you can liken to other songs before, but Tonight, 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 I think is the sound that's very original.
It's kind of still one of those journey songs. It went through different changes, and it was outside the kind of the format of singles. We were just writing how we felt like at the time, and we weren't trying to have hit singles. We weren't trying to be commercial. I just think that's the way it just happened to have turned out on that record.
Obviously, we edited it down as a single, and it was a big hit in the States, particularly, and it was a hit in England, I think, too, actually. But it's obviously, the extended version has quite a long middle eight. It's more like a traditional Genesis song, goes through lots of changes, and there's this sort of very ethereal kind of middle part, which, is a very nice piece of music, actually, but it's obviously didn't make it onto the single. But it's, I guess I can't put my finger on what it is, really. I mean, obviously Phil had got him, he'd become established more as a singles act. That opened a few doors for us in terms of radio, prepared to sort of, listen to it, I suppose. But I think the songs were there anyhow, a song like Invisible Touch or Land of Confusion, they're hit songs, I think, by anybody.
At this time, on this album, I think I got very conscious of what was going on, actually, was that the public perception of us was because MTV was in full swing now. We were having hit singles and videos doing well. I think the profile you get with a hit single was so huge, it dwarfed everything else. So I think people forget there were long songs on this album, like Domino. I mean, I think there's always this thing about, you're a progressive band with the long songs and then you ended up doing the shorter songs. We didn't really ever stop doing the longer songs. They were just dwarfed, perception-wise, by the power of television, really. And funny enough, when you see us live, that balance is so different. I mean, I think when you see us live, the long songs are probably as big a part of the audience's enjoyment as the short songs. And the balance is very much half and half. So I think in a way, songs like Domino get rather forgotten until we go on stage.
Well, I never did see such a terrible thing as you seen last night on the TV. Maybe if we're lucky, they will show it again. Such a terrible thing to see. Oh.
Well, to me, it is a very important track, Domino. I mean, it's sort of, I suppose, I'm sure they will say it's kind of more me, perhaps, than the others in a way. The lyrics mine, and I was trying to get across sort of a political kind of message, and it's sort of, about how politicians, a bit like what people like nowadays, I think, in a way, but politicians don't sort of sometimes, I think through what it is they've started off. They do something, and then the fact that all these people are going to be, husbands are going to be killed, and all the unexpected consequences that occur when you start something off, and people tend to think very sort of blinkered about a thing. They think we've got to get rid of this guy, got to do that, and of course everything else happens, and that's what the song was all about, really. And it was a nice, big, long song, gave you an opportunity to have a bit of fun, both lyrically and musically. And also, the end section is very strong, the bit, it's got a very strong guitar riff, and it's worked, a classic stage song ever since, I think. It's one of in a funny way, it's almost, from a stage point of view, it's one of the best songs off the album, just because it gives you more room to breathe. The longer songs tend to work better on stage, I think.
I thought it's time, whatever age I was on, I can't remember, I thought it was time for a protest song. I thought the time was right, after all these years. But done in a fairly subtle way, Actually, I remember, this is the last lyric to be finished, I think. And I was behind schedule and late as usual. I think he'd sung all the other songs, actually, and I hadn't finished it. And we were, Phil works at a great tempo in the studio, which is great. He pushes it along, And I remember I was actually in bed with a horrendous sort of flu thing at home, so I started delirious. And he came round and sort of sat on the bedroom, I think, This I remember it, I'm sure. And I gave him the lyric, thinking I don't know if it's any good. I was a bit sort of, you know, a fever and a temperature, thinking I think it's all right, you know what I mean? And then he sang it. I wasn't there at the time. I don't think he sang the first version of it. It really kind of worked.
Well, Land of Confusion was a lyric that Mike wrote. Yes, it was a sort of obviously, well, it's got a much more straightforward political message, I think, really, and being a more instant song and a more of a hit, it's probably had slightly more effect. And it was, the video obviously was great fun to do for that, you know. I mean, it's the best video we ever did, far and away, because we're not in it. It's as simple as that.
Oh, Superman, where are you now? Well, everything's gone wrong somehow. The man of steel, the man of power, losing control by the hour.
You know, when we came into this business back in 1969 or something, there was we did Genesis Revelation. It was, you know, we were with Jonathan King. We were trying to do hit singles. That's what we were trying to do. We just tried to write hits, and no one would do them, and we didn't appear to be that good at doing it. And then I think we were sort of shown the way by groups at the time, like, you know, the King Crimsons and Family and Fairport Convention, of another way of approaching music a little bit. And that's why we went to go into the progressive thing. And we found that we were kind of able to do things in that area that no one else was doing, whereas in the pop area, we weren't so original. By the time we got to this stage, I think we just felt we'd kind of almost gone as far as we could in certain directions of going into deep progressive music and extended solos and all the rest of it. And, you know, the idea of trying to craft songs a little bit more was quite appealing. So that's what ended up on this album.
Each one of those songs, like Land of Confusion, In Too Deep, Tonight, Invisible Touch, Throwing It All Away, they were all kind of either top 5, top 10 singles in the States. And I think that was probably the 85-86 tour as well we did with that. That was the first stadium tour. I mean, that opened up a whole... That was probably our peak in America to some extent.
I think we were fairly confident with going into We Can't Dance. I was actually surprised to see that Phil was still there, actually. I fully expected him to have disappeared. He'd had so much success, you know, I thought, well, he doesn't need us guys anymore.
After the Invisible Touch tour, I decided to... That's when I started working on my train set, if I remember rightly. And then I did some film work, so I did Buster. So that took care of a fair amount of time, preparation, filming, shooting, editing, doing that soundtrack or getting involved in that. Then I did But Seriously, which was my record between Invisible Touch and We Can't Dance, and on that whole world tour thing with Sirius too. So there was every reason for there to be a delay.
I think at this stage we had this thing whereby we were doing a Genesis record and then solo stuff, and I was doing Mike and Mechanics now, and so you start to, you come back with just, you've learned things, you know, and that I think that break, that variety of creative work with other people, when you kind of came back fresh, ready to appreciate what the other two did.
I was still very fully committed, and to me, I was actually more involved in We Can't Dance than any other record.
I felt pretty confident going in that we could do something good, you know. I felt that, you know, still felt a lot of good ideas around. And we were writing, and we decided to change producer just to sort of, or producer-engineer, just to give ourselves a bit of a kick in the arse, really. I'd worked with Nick Davis, went on the solo album Still and things, and Mike had worked with them as well. And we thought it would be fun to try someone different. And of course, Nick has ended up being the man who's done all the remixes, you know. He's a very, very good engineer, producer guy. But so all those things were a little bit different. And we went in, and again, just the same way as we had with Invisible Touch, we had nothing written, and we just started improvising and seeing what ideas would come. And fortunately, things came.
I think No Son of Mine is probably one of my most recent favourite tracks, because once again it's sort of, it's almost like the start of what we could be doing, what was the next sort of stage, you know what I mean? It's like once again a dark atmosphere. That sound Tony has was a little guitar thing I played which he looped, and and messed around with and made it sound like an elephant.
Trying to find a way out.
Sounds like an elephant being sick, which is a very distinctive sound. You know, again, I always like to try and get a sound in there if I can. This was, again, just sampling noise in the room, and it was just Mike actually making some thrashing around, and I just cut out this little bit in the middle of it, and then slowed it right down, and just used the front end of it, and stuck it with this E minor chord. And the effect was fantastic. I thought, this is great, I love this. And immediately, then Phil started warbling on top of it, and we thought we got a song here. This sounds really good.
This album was probably the best example of the three of us improvising, and I'm singing improvising at the same time. We did it before, but this was much more so on this record, where there'd be a drum machine playing and Mike would be playing something, Tony would be playing, and I'd be singing. And out of that stuff, like No Son of Mine, improvised most of it, well, a lot of it, not most of it, a lot of it.
If you can just set up an atmosphere sometimes, that's what it's all about. You just get a sort of a feel going. And funnily enough, what you do after it sometimes is not so important. Once you've got that initial mood, it carries you for a long, long time. And so I was very proud of that one. And then I thought the lyric that Phil wrote on top of it, I thought was one of the best as well. Really good, that.
The lyric of No Son of Mine, again, was one of those, every time we played the thing, it was like, you're no son of mine. I know, I have no idea why I sang it. No idea at all. Just those words, they sang well. So it was a story of this kid that kind of basically was tired of going home and seeing his mother and father fighting. Father would come back having drunk too much and wallop, and he just had enough. And eventually he realised that he needed to confront this problem. So it was a story.
It's probably my favourite song on the album in many ways. We play it on stage and everything. It still sends shivers down my spine. It's just a song. It seems if you can do it all with sort of like a few chords and simple rhythm, then I think there's nothing to be against that.
It was on a divine visitation that the Lord told me that I was to go on the television. The Lord actually talks to me, I hear what's being said. And he said to me, get me $18 million by the weekend. And the angel of the Lord stands by my side and speaks into my ear. It's a beautiful thing, and I hear what's being said. It's a marvelous, marvelous experience. I never thought such a thing could happen. In the name of Jesus.
When we first went to America back in the early 70s, you switched on the telly, and we all came down one day and said, did you see that on television? We just couldn't believe it. It was just unbelievable. I'd never, having been brought up on sort of Z cars and stuff, you suddenly see this guy sort of, I believe, and all this. It was something extraordinary. We were mesmerised by it, really.
There was this famous guy, and I can't remember exactly, Oral Roberts or Jimmy Swaggart or, one of those guys that actually had gone on television saying that he'd had a dream and been... Christ or the God had told him that he has to get $18 million by the weekend, So it's for him and not for me, And people were giving him this money, and this was a current story, really. But it was all going on, and I couldn't resist the temptation to write about it.
Do you see the face on the TV screen coming at you every Sunday? See the face on the billboard? Well, that man is me. On the cover of a magazine, there's no question why I'm smiling. You buy a piece of paradise, you buy a piece of me.
When I first started singing it, I don't think Tony and Mike thought I was trying to take it from the funny point of view. They kind of weren't sure about it. And I kind of said, no, this is like, this is meant to be a parody of, Life of Brian. I know I should know about the Messiah. I followed a few.
I've been talking to Jesus all my life. Oh yes, he knows me, and he knows I'm right.
And then, of course, we followed through with the video, which, and there was a guy called Ernest Ainsley who was my hero, really. I mean, I had to watch him. Anytime I saw him, I had to watch him because I couldn't quite believe this guy was doing it, out, I believe. And so, I even collected videos of him, and I was just obsessed with this guy because I couldn't believe how awful he was. It was awful suits, awful wig, that just, no matter how old he got, the wig stayed the same. And we made the video, which is basically me doing him, and we did it in Dallas while we were rehearsing.
Always love dressing up on the video. I like to think that it's a way we could sort of be humorous without being embarrassing. Well, I don't think it was. Looking back, it seems it's tongue-in-cheek, and because the lyric is quite a strong subject, it makes any kind of fooling around by us okay, I think.
The middle eight, which was great because we could pretend to be like, we felt the evangelists really were, you know, and we've got the swimming pools, all these beautiful girls around us, you know, it was our one chance to have beautiful girls everywhere, so we took it.
Won't find me practicing what I'm preaching. Won't find me making no sacrifice.
It wasn't meant to be irreverent to religion or God or Christ, you know, it was actually meant to say, come on people, wake up, these guys are fleecing you, you know.
Tony had this boom, boom, boom. She played on the keyboard. And I had a guitar riff. And what I do remember actually is that I remember playing it and thinking, well, that's really quite nice. But then I couldn't find it again. I had to go back and find the tape, recorded it, and listen over and over and over again to work it out. Because it's a simple riff, but it's quite unusual the way it's actually put together.
We couldn't quite find the way to do it. We tried doing it heavy, Phil would sort of play big drums and I was big and nothing was really sounding very good. And one time I got this new keyboard, which was a sort of Roland thing, and it had a sort of preset drum sound thing on it. And I just started playing along with it. It had a bass drum, and I went boom, 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 like this, and then started playing these silly sounds on top of it. And the whole thing suddenly took on this completely different character. And we thought, well, this is really good. We'll do it like that. And what we did was actually, after we'd written it, we didn't do anything to it for about the next month or two, and then just said, well, we'll put that song down, the one with the guitar riff.
You know, 5 minutes work, you know, that was our classic example of, let's not do this anymore, let's just record this right now, you know. And I remember Mike was doing the guitar part again, and I was writing the lyrics in the corner on a chair and said, I'm finished, you know, and we went and did it.
And next day we had the song, and we thought, that's great, it's just so simple, you know, just keep it really, really simple. A lot of humour, and it works. A great contrast to other things we've done in our career, really. So I was, you know, pretty pleased with that as well.
But I can dance, I can talk. The only thing about me is the way that I walk.
Well, the dance is something actually, that was Phil really. I mean, we were in the studio, I can't remember what we were doing. It was a 3-day shoot in Los Angeles, and he suddenly just started doing that, you know. And it took an hour and a half to record it. And I'll always forever be known as the guy who does that. But better than Tony, I hope.
As we get older and older, the only thing that people remember us about is this walk, you know. But it's good to be remembered for something, is what I'd say, you know.
No, I can dance, I can talk. The only thing about me is the way I walk. No, I can dance, I can sing. I'm just standing there saying everything.
I remember reading Roger Waters doing an interview in Rolling Stone, said, and as for Genesis, you know, doing that stupid walk with that awful song. And I kind of thought, I mean, now I've met Roger a few times, and I kind of know that, you know, he's a miserable bastard, basically. You know, I love his music, but really, you know, he's kind of has got no sense of humour. Or not. He has a very dark, cynical sense of humour. But he didn't see the fun in it at all. I kind of think he felt that this was our big statement. But so I did write to him and tell him. But he just said that what he said was meant to be off the record, which didn't exactly make it any better.
Driving the Last Spike was a slightly interesting thing for us in a way, because it had always been on previous albums, only the previous 3 or 4, the long songs. Tony writes the lyrics for the long songs and all the rest of it. And on this one, Phil said, well, let me have a go. I'd like to try a long song. So he said, okay. And I said, well, let's Drive the Last Spike. Why not, you know? And so he wrote a lyric, which I think was, from his point of view, he really enjoyed doing, because you could stretch a little bit more and write more of a story and bring in other ideas. This is what you can do on a long song. You've got, and also instrumental things kind of illustrate things. You know, you've got the nice sort of mechanical bit in the middle of that where the sort of everything's going. And I think when you're writing a lyric like that, you listen to the song and the little ideas come at you from it. And so I think it has a different character from sort of things like Domino, Home by the Sea, where I tend to get slightly more intense, you know, and he's got a slightly different approach. I think it works quite nicely.
Waving goodbye as I left them in tears, remembering all we'd said.
I love that song. I sang the melodies to what the music, the chords that Tony was playing. I ended up being sent this book, actually, coincidentally around the same time, called the Railway Navvies, and I read it, and I just, the idea, the things you never think about, you know, like the railways, you know, you go through a tunnel and, you know, on a train, you don't think anything of it. Then you think of how that tunnel was built way back in the 1800s, how many people were killed making the tunnel when the tunnel collapsed, or when it was, you know, the explosions to move, you know. So I just wrote this song about these people that just went off and left their families and maybe never come back. I mean, it wasn't war, this was just building a railway, you know. So, you know, songs like that I really, really loved, and I kind of was really proud of my work on We Can't Dance.
This album, the Can't Dance album, was a good album cover. But some of our best work comes from when you find something that was already out there and adapt it. It's quite hard commissioning sometimes because they come back and you kind of go, well, don't you like it, you know? So I think it was just a nice Little Men on the Moon. It reminded me of that book by The Little Prince, Petit Prince by Saint-Exupéry. It had that same look, a little man on that planet. And I think our stuff often works quite well, slightly animated.
The We Can't Dance album cover I thought was a nice return to form. I thought it was the best album cover we'd had certainly since Duke. Again, kind of similar to Duke in a way. It's very simple, just a sort of a cartoon type picture almost, you know, but strong atmosphere, I think, and just a feel about it that suggested that the album, you know, had a little more romance in it perhaps than the previous one, and just, you know, I think it worked nicely, and a great logo too, which of course we've ended up using ever since then to ease the wrong way round. You know, just seems to still fit.
The last three albums, Genesis, Invisible Touch with Phil, and We Can't Dance, I just remember the writing of them being a real pleasure to do. Fast, easy, really, really creative, you know, things just came out.
There were a lot of good moments on it, really, and we were very confident at this stage. And I did feel when we finished this record, probably the only time in my career I thought, well, I think this is going to do very well, this album. You know, every other time I've always had a bit of trepidation, but this time I felt pretty good.
I got a call about the Genesis job in the early summer of 1996, around about May time. It was my brother's birthday, I remember that, and I was in the middle of making my breakfast, and the phone rang, and it was Tony Smith asking if I would audition with a view to replacing Phil in the band because he'd left.
Certainly by the time We Can't Dance came out and by the time they did the tour, I had no intention of leaving. That was still, I was getting more of me out on that album and that tour than ever before. So it was just the personal events that coloured the direction that I went in.
We sort of knew that Phil felt it was time to move on, I think, for him to do other stuff. So I think, as I've said before, and Tony has, you know, I think looking back, I think it was great that Phil stayed that long. You know, I think a lot of people who actually had that kind of solo career would want to move on, but I think he enjoyed, I'm sure he did, doing what we did. You know, the writing process we have is still, I think, one of the most special things musically I've ever been involved with, you know, and I think that was always there. But then it's time we've done it for a long time, it's time to move on, sort of thing.
My inclination was, let's call it a day, or let's see, you know, who knows in 10 years' time, like now, in fact. He might sort of say, why not have a go again? But, you know, we talked about it, and Mike particularly was quite keen. He said, well, let's just go in the studio, see what happens, you know. Right, improvise, see what happens. So of course we went to the studio, started improvising, I go, oh, this sounds really good, I like this bit and stuff. But it was just the two of us, you know, and we needed to get a singer. So that was the problem, really, trying to find a singer.
The initial reaction was wow, you know, what a strange call to get, and what a strange situation to find myself in. I guess soon after that, I started to think about it and thought, is this really for me? You know, I'm not really a big fan of Genesis. I don't really know all that much about them. Is it something I should be doing? And I'd also been recording or writing an album, the first album after Stiltskin's record, and I'd just finished it, so I was really quite passionate about what I'd been writing. And didn't want to stop. But of course, you're faced with, singing with one of the biggest bands in the world, or just carrying on in your kind of small career. And I think in hindsight, a big part of me wishes I'd carried on with my career.
Calling all stations. Can anybody tell me exactly where I am?
My favourite song on Calling All Stations has to be the title track. It just had an energy about it. It just sounded like an authentic Genesis song to me, and I sang it well. Really, really enjoy that song.
Yeah, I think the opening track was meant to be sort of something that showed our the dark side, and that kind of melody really suits Ray's voice, I think.
It was like the Mama track on the album. Mama was always one of my favourite songs, and Calling All Stations for me had that same drama about it.
Dramatic kind of traditional Genesis, I suppose, in terms of the chords and the rhythm and everything about it. And then, vocal that's sort of, which is sort of, again, not rare for us, which doesn't really repeat all that much. Perhaps echoed slightly more earlier Genesis, this sort of feeling with Ray had a very dark voice, And I think towards the end of the song, it really lifts. It gets fantastic sound about it. I'd like to have lifted a little bit earlier on. I think that's my only feeling about that song. It needed to lift a little earlier. But it's still, I think, it's still sort of song I'm proud of. I think that works really well.
I remember with these songs, I'd sing them 2 or 3 times, and then Nick Davis would kind of comp it together, the best from each take. Calling All Stations, the last take I did, I seem to remember, was the one that just took everything I had. I was singing from the pits of my stomach, and singing that song live was a real challenge, a bit like Mama was for Phil. I think he sang that in the studio. Sounds amazing, but try reproducing that one live. It's hard, and Calling All Stations was like that for me.
One of my favourites was Shipwrecked. I think we could have done it a lot better, actually, looking back, the way he recorded the backing track. But it's a very, very nice mood, and I like the title. He says, well, he wrote it. It's a nice title, Shipwrecked. I think if you had a producer, I mean, Nick's an engineer producer, Nick Davis, but had we had a producer who was more of a producer in terms of trying to get ideas and develop songs, we probably could have done a better version of that, I think.
It's a song, again, which started off with a little... I just did a sample of something Mike played, and then sort of did it and got this little riff which sounded really good, and then screwed it up to make this sort of very thin sound, and we sort of wrote the song around this riff. And I think it still sounds pretty good to me, that really.
It's an interesting song, but yeah, it's a good track, and it fitted the style, the way I sang, and I made that song my own.
In musical terms, I think there's lots of good moments on this record. I think it stands up very well.
I think the 2 things that I found hard really was the chemistry of that third person was not really replaced. I mean, Ray came in and did a very good job, but there wasn't a third person kind of between me and Tony to make us work, I think, like Phil used to.
Probably a lot of it didn't go. It washed over me. It didn't go inside, very easily, which is typical of Tony and Mike's material, I think. You see, this is where the 3 of us kind of had the best of all worlds, if you like, because I'm kind of pretty immediate. Tony's kind of a little bit. You may not know it at the moment, but you'll probably be singing this to yourself in a couple of weeks' time, And then Mike is somewhere in the middle there. He'll write things that not that immediate, but then I mean, it's just a kind of. It makes the things deeper. It makes the stuff deeper when you've got the 3 of us writing. And I could see that there wasn't much of that immediacy there, which means people had to invest their time in listening to it. And I don't think people wanted to. They either didn't want to, or unfortunately the timing was such that we were entering this soundbite stage of our lives, you know, where everything is now reduced to like the shortest possible time because people, you know, if they don't like it, they'll turn on to the next track. If they don't like it, turn on to the next track. The commitment that people had when they started buying our records, you know, just isn't there for most people.
I was very happy working with Mike and Tony. I thought, you know, the perfect gentlemen to work with, both very talented, you know, and it was, you know, I learned a lot working with them, the way they go about writing. So yeah, I enjoyed it. You know, I was always looking forward to writing the next album with them because I felt we could have started the whole process together rather than me coming in late on and throwing some ideas in there. I think if we'd started the whole process together, it could be quite interesting.
People forget, you know, Pete left in 75, you know, that career was small, well, great fun, but small, whereas the next 30 years were sort of, 25 years were a big part of our career. You can't, the only way you can replace history is by giving more history, and that takes time.
I'd like to have worked with Ray on in a studio from the word go. It would have been interesting to try to write for that voice, so it would have been a different approach. And I mean, we did even consider the idea of perhaps you know using both Nia and particularly Nia, I think, and Anthony Drennan as well. And I think he's a great guitarist. I really liked different kind of guitarist to what we've used in the past, but it's sort of a really lovely style. And the idea of using them a bit on the album as well, rather than sticking with just the three, would have been quite an interesting thing to do. But there comes a point sometimes you've got to sort of the writing seemed to be on the wall, I think, and we just sort of read it and thought it's probably time to sort of just give it a bit of a break.